Bishop's Appeal was set up in the early 70s as a response from the House of Bishops to famine in Ethiopia. At the heart of Bishop's Appeal, there has always been a vision to be a connected church, a church that doesn't exist for itself, but that walks alongside others, one that looks up and looks out, and in doing so finds Christ, who ignites our connections and leads us out of hopelessness.
We as a church should be seen to helping those in poorer countries, those in developing countries. We look at education, we look at food, we look at rural design, and in particular we keep a fund for major disasters such as flooding, cyclones, earthquakes and so on.
Over the past 50 years, we have continued to respond to disasters and emergencies, but from the very beginning, this went hand in hand with responding to injustice. The injustice that causes a web of poverty to entangle the majority of the world, and the sin of gross inequality and all the systems and structures that perpetrate it. Church of Ireland donations have responded in historic situations, in support of Vietnamese boat people, providing relief for Cambodians fleeing the Khmer Rouge. Donations have provided life-saving supports in the aftermath of cyclones and earthquakes, during droughts, famines, and even pandemics. And donations have been vital amidst the brutality of war, supporting people who have been decimated by such tragedies, with provisions of medical supplies, food, water and water purification kits, emergency shelters, even seeds and tools or pop-up schools and trauma counselling. Then, in the aftermath of war, perhaps when the world is no longer watching, donations have continued to support the rebuilding and the provisions people need to begin again.
Last year in May, the volcano just outside Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo erupted. As the lava came down, it was across many parishes in Goma City, and part of the destruction was to the primary schools that are in many of those parishes, and one of them was completely flattened by the lava of the volcano, and so the church was crying out in crisis of what to do. The government had made a ruling that no one was allowed to build on the lava flow, and so the church had to look for funds to buy a completely new plot of land for this school. And of course, when children are displaced due to a disaster like that, one of the main things that we want to do for their mental health and their progress is to get them back into routine and normality. And so Bishop's Appeal was able to help us get funding to buy that new piece of land for the school. And the new school's been built already. The children are already back in there learning and back into their normal routine, in spite of the fact that they've lost their homes and some of their belongings in that disaster that happened.
As Bishop's Appeal, we believe we are not simply called to react from the sidelines. We are called to walk alongside and to play our part in the restoration process. We believe that God's plan for people's lives is not survival, it's flourishing. So seeking justice and fairness and an end to poverty are therefore integral parts of the church's mission. And when we play our part in that mission, we are joining with others who are playing their part, all strands being woven into a beautiful tapestry by the master designer.
So one of the first projects that I was aware of that was funded by Bishop's Appeal was a vocational training college in northern Uganda for Sudanese refugees. I remember particularly a story of one girl called Nema. She was born in the refugee camp to a mother who was unable to look after her and left her as a baby at the door of the local pastor's house. The local pastor took her in and did his best for her, sending her to school in the camp. But she struggled with academic work and wasn't able to complete primary school. Eventually, as an older teenager, he heard about the vocational training college and brought her along to the college there in Arua. She was admitted onto the building course, and although she struggled to get through some of the written work on the course, she did very well with the practicals, and eventually after 1 year she qualified from that course as a builder. Several years later I went back to South Sudan and I bumped into her and I said, what are you doing nowadays, Nema? She said, well, I'm settled back here in South Sudan. And I said, how are you supporting yourself? And she said, well, I'm a builder, of course. And she told me that she had 2 children that she was supporting through school. She was able to pay their school fees. And I also asked her, well, what have you been building? And she said, well, I've been involved in building schools across South Sudan.
Over half the children in Nigeria under 5 were all dying with malaria through mosquitoes, and we decided an aim for £100,000 to raise, and we did raise £117,000.
If the Church of Ireland had sent 50,000 mosquito nets to people struggling to feed their families due to constant ill health, many people have said afterwards that they would have sold those nets for food. But instead, the partnership saw Christian Aid bring together faith leaders and community leaders to lead and promote the programme. They ran education workshops, net maintenance and repair workshops, and when people knew the importance of the nets and how to care for them, the nets were then distributed. Within 2 years, 90% of all children were sleeping under the nets. The mortality rate had decreased, and malaria in women and children was reduced by over 50%. The story of the road to Emmaus speaks to us when disasters seem cyclical, never ending. Suffering seems to occur in relentless waves, and people get caught up in crisis after crisis again and again, and we think we're no closer to peace and justice than when we started. There is no hope, but unbeknownst to us, in our faithful walking alongside each other and listening to one another and sharing each other's load, Jesus is with us and change is underway. Today in Ethiopia, there is still prolonged periods of drought, exacerbated by COVID, climate change, rising food costs, locusts, and conflict. But also today in Ethiopia, there are now over 1 million people in local self-help groups and saving schemes, thanks to our partner, Tear Fund. People have learned business and improved agricultural skills. They have saved funds from their ventures. They share ideas and weather forecasts and advice on how to withstand intensely dry periods. Bishop's Appeal has repeatedly funded these programs, knowing that when crisis hits, it is still devastating. But now, for so many, they have reserves.
Well, my prayer for the Church of Ireland is that it would be a mission-shaped church. And Bishop's Appeal is a conduit for the mission of the Church of Ireland on a global dimension in transforming the lives of people who face such hardships that we know nothing about. And in Jesus Christ, we want people to be free and to flourish.
As we advocate, we also educate. We have things to learn and unlearn, and we have mindsets that need to be challenged. But we know that when we play our part, when we commit to connection, change happens. Jesus meets with us along the road and lives are transformed. Now, as we take stock, we acknowledge all that has been achieved by the grace of God. But it is also time to ask ourselves, what change do we want to be part of for the next 50 years?